Take a look at the objects around you right now. Whether you are holding a phone, sitting at a desk, or wearing a pair of headphones, there is a high probability that most of what you see is made of a material that did not exist a little over a century ago. We live in a world defined by its surfaces, and for most of human history, those surfaces were limited by what we could grow, dig up, or shear off an animal. If you wanted something hard and durable, you used stone or metal. If you wanted something flexible, you used leather or fabric. If you wanted something beautiful and moldable, you reached for wood or ivory. This was the organic wall that humanity lived behind for thousands of years. Everything we built was ultimately tied to the slow, seasonal cycles of the natural world. Our tools, our homes, and our personal belongings were all extensions of the landscape. But at the dawn of the 20th century, that wall started to crumble, and it happened because of a messy, sticky failure in a laboratory that changed the very chemistry of our lives. Before this transition, the world was facing a massive supply chain crisis that we rarely talk about today. As the Industrial Revolution picked up speed, the demand for high-end materials began to outstrip what nature could provide. The pressure was mounting from all sides of the burgeoning modern economy. Consider the billiard ball. In the late 1800s, billiards was a massive social obsession, but the balls were made from solid ivory, harvested from the tusks of elephants. This meant thousands of animals had to be killed every year just to satisfy a game played in smoky parlors. It was expensive, it was cruel, and from a business perspective, it was entirely unsustainable. The price of ivory was skyrocketing, and manufacturers were desperate for a substitute that could mimic the weight and the bounce of the real thing. Or consider the electrical industry, which was the high-tech frontier of the time. Every new wire and motor needed insulation to prevent fires and short circuits. The best material for this was shellac, a natural resin made from the secretions of a tiny beetle found in Southeast Asia. To get just 1 pound of shellac, you needed thousands of insects and months of labor. As the world started to wire itself for light and power, the demand for beetle spit became a literal bottleneck for human progress. We were attempting to build a future of lightning and speed using the slow, biological processes of a tiny insect. The limitations were physical, economic, and geographic. This was the hard constraint of the Victorian era. We were trying to build a modern, electrified, mass-produced world using the leftovers of the biological world. The hunt was on for a synthetic alternative, something that could be made in a factory rather than harvested in a forest or a field. Many inventors tried to solve this by tweaking natural materials. They made early versions of plastic from cotton fibers or milk proteins. These were interesting experiments, and they found some niche uses, but they had a fatal flaw. They were fundamentally unstable. They were highly flammable, often catching fire with the slightest spark, and they would warp in the summer heat or grow brittle and shatter over time. The world was still waiting for a material that was entirely man-made, something that did not just imitate nature, but surpassed it in every functional way. The breakthrough came from a chemist who was not even looking for a new material to change the world. He was simply trying to find a way to make a better, cheaper version of shellac to sell to the electrical industry. He was working with two fairly common industrial chemicals, phenol and formaldehyde. When he mixed them together and heated them up, they usually created a thin, smelly liquid, or a useless, sticky mess that was impossible to clean out of his test tubes. For a long time, this was seen as a failure. In the world of chemistry, a reaction that produces a solid, unworkable gunk that you cannot dissolve or melt back down is usually a sign that you have done something wrong. It was considered a waste of time and equipment. But this inventor had a different perspective. He began to wonder if that very stubbornness, that refusal to melt or break down, was actually the prize. He saw potential where others saw a ruined experiment. To test his theory, he built a heavy iron pressure cooker, which he called a Bakelizer. This machine allowed him to carefully control the temperature and pressure of the reaction, pushing the chemicals past their normal limits. One day, he opened the machine and found that the liquid had transformed into a hard, translucent, amber-colored solid. He tried to melt it, but it would not budge, even under intense heat. He tried to dissolve it in powerful solvents, but it remained intact. He realized he had created the first true synthetic polymer. This was Bakelite. Unlike the earlier plastics that were based on plant matter, this was a thermoset plastic. Once it was formed under heat and pressure, its molecular structure locked into a permanent three-dimensional grid. It was the first material in history that was literally heat-proof, waterproof, and an almost perfect insulator for electricity. It did not rot, it did not rust, and it did not warp. It was the failure that taught the winning lesson. You did not want a material that acted like wood or bug resin. You wanted a material that was functionally immortal. The timing could not have been more perfect. As Bakelite moved out of the lab and into the factory, it triggered a revolution in how things were made. Before this, if you wanted to make a complicated shape, like the casing for a telephone or a decorative radio box, a master craftsman had to carve it from wood, sand it down, and polish it by hand. It took hours of skilled labor to produce a single item. But Bakelite was different. You could take the raw, powdered resin, put it into a heavy metal mold, apply heat and pressure, and a few minutes later you would pop out a finished part that was perfectly smooth and ready to use. This was the birth of the era of precision molding. It allowed for a level of consistency and speed that had been physically impossible before. If you had 10,000 molds, you could make 10,000 identical items that were all exactly the same size and shape. This was the dream of mass production realized in a way that wood or metal could never achieve. Suddenly, the aesthetics of the modern world began to change. Because Bakelite could be molded into almost any shape, designers started to move away from the boxy, wooden styles of the past. The material allowed for the sleek, curved lines of the Art Deco movement. Radios became iconic, dark, shiny centerpieces of the living room, looking more like pieces of architecture than furniture. Telephones became heavy, solid objects that felt substantial and permanent in the hand. The material was marketed as the material of 1,000 uses, and the claim was not an exaggeration. It was in the handles of irons, the knobs on car dashboards, the buttons on coats, and the colorful jewelry on the wrists of fashion-forward women. It was even used in the early aerospace industry because it could withstand the incredible heat of an engine. It was everywhere because it was cheap, it was reliable, and it was entirely independent of the weather or the harvest. For the first time, human beings were not waiting for nature to provide the raw materials for their inventions. We were creating the materials ourselves. As the middle of the century approached, the success of Bakelite paved the way for a massive expansion in material science. Scientists began to understand the underlying principles of polymers, those long chains of molecules that give plastics their unique properties. During the pressures of a global war, research went into overdrive as countries scrambled to find replacements for resources that were being cut off by enemy blockades. We saw the birth of nylon to replace silk in parachutes, providing a strength and elasticity that changed the nature of textiles. We saw the development of polyethylene to insulate radar cables, a crucial technological advantage in the air. When the war ended, all of that massive industrial capacity was turned toward the consumer market. This was the transition from the Bakelite era to the true Polymer Age. This was when plastic stopped being a high-end replacement for ivory and started becoming the default material for everything. The variety of plastics exploded. We developed transparent films, flexible tubes, and incredibly strong fibers. The economics of life shifted fundamentally. In the early days, a plastic radio was a luxury item, something to be kept for decades and polished with care. But as new types of plastics, like polystyrene and PVC, were developed, the cost of production plummeted even further. We entered the age of disposability. The idea that you could use something once and throw it away was a radical departure from all of human history. For thousands of years, if you owned a bowl or a tool, you fixed it until it could not be fixed anymore. You handed it down to your children. Plastic changed that deep human relationship with objects. It made goods so cheap that the labor of washing or repairing them became more expensive than the object itself. This created a level of convenience and hygiene that we now take for granted. It allowed for sterile medical supplies that could be used once and discarded, preventing the spread of disease. It allowed for fresh food to be wrapped in thin films that extended its shelf life and made global transport possible. However, the very thing that made the first plastic a success is the thing that haunts us today. That original breakthrough was about creating a material that was indestructible, something that would not rot, rust, or react with the environment. We were so successful at creating a permanent material that we did not stop to ask what happens when we are done with it. The resilience of these molecular chains means that almost every piece of plastic ever made still exists in some form today. It has broken down into smaller and smaller pieces, scattered by the wind and the waves, but it has not gone away. We are living with the legacy of a material that was designed to never fail, in a world that is now struggling to deal with that very permanence. Looking back, the story of plastic is a story of how a technical failure can reveal a hidden path. By leaning into the stubbornness of a chemical mess, we unlocked a way to reshape the physical world to our own specifications. We stopped being gatherers of materials and became creators of them. This shift allowed for the democratization of technology, making electronics and high-performance tools available to billions of people rather than just a wealthy few. It is the invisible backbone of modern life, present in everything from the insulation in our walls to the screens we stare at for hours every day. It is a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of the unintended consequences that come when we finally break through the limits of nature. And that is how the age of plastics began, transforming every object we touch from a rare treasure into a mass-produced reality. Before we move forward into the heart of the 20th century, we need to take a quick step sideways in our story. While new materials were changing what things were made of, another invention was changing where we could actually live. To understand how our modern world really took shape, we have to look at the missing context of air conditioning and indoor climate control. So subscribe and join us for that next shift in human history.